Welcome to week 9 of History 425, Modern China. We'll start in this lecture with how the Chinese Communist Party runs China, the structures that it uses, and then the methods that they use in part 2 of this lecture, and finally talk a little bit about the alternative that has developed on Taiwan, which could be important eventually in the future. A bit of a wild card, I like to call it. Let's go on to slide 3. On charts that you'll see that show how the PRC government and the Chinese Communist Party are constructed, quite often the National People's Congress will be at the top. And in theory, it and the large Chinese Communist Party Central Committee, now that's the government side versus the party side. In theory, these two large bodies are the boss. Just like in theory, the voter in this country is the boss of everyone who is elected. But as we all know, the truth is a little bit different, no matter where you go, compared to the theory. And in China, it's extremely different. And that's because in China, the people who make up these congresses are not at all independent. The members of these large bodies are not independent. They have to follow orders. The members of these congresses, as you see in our film for this week, where a delegate from Xinjiang out in the west is interviewed as a delegate to the National People's Congress who's not a Communist Party member. She's a dance instructor, and she is interviewed about her role. Obviously, she's a articulate and intelligent individual, but when she goes to Beijing for one of the yearly meetings of the National Party Congress, she's there to do as she's told. And indeed, everyone in both the National People's Congress and the CCP Central Committee do what they're told. They're not really elected, with a few exceptions, at the local level. Rather, they are picked by committees of party officials. And when they travel to their conclaves, they come with instructions about how they're going to vote and briefings about what the issues are going to be. And as you can see in this photograph, virtually everybody votes one way. That's normal. It's been that way for decades in China. It's not so much a Chinese thing as it is the sort of thing you see in any authoritarian country where opposition to the regime in power will land you in big trouble. So again, the NPC, the National People's Congress, is the government side. It meets once a year, and it votes on laws. It formally enacts laws, and it formally enacts the country's constitution. So these are separate, in theory, from the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go on to slide 4 and talk about the party side. Now, the party, according to the Constitution, is the superior organization in the country. It runs everything. It has the final say on everything. And again, in theory, the Central Committee is the highest organization in the party. Now, in this chart on the right, it's a bit of a non-traditional chart, because you can see that in the upper middle is the Standing Committee of the Politburo. That, of course, is the most important body. Right now, there are only 7 members on the Politburo. Until last year, there were 9. The Politburo Standing Committee had been expanding. Now there are 27 members on the Politburo, the expanded Politburo. And every single one of those people is quite influential. However, the ones who meet almost every day of the week to decide critical issues are the Politburo Standing Committee. So they're the real bosses of the country. However, unlike the previous times when Mao Zedong was in charge, Chairman Mao, the chairman of the party, and he started off as head and shoulders first among equals in the 1950s, and then after the Great Leap Forward, especially, well, really after the 100 Flowers and the crackdown that followed, he was the absolutely undisputed leader, and anything he said would go. Even, of course, when China entered the Korean War in 1950, Mao had the prestige and the power to single-handedly overrule the Politburo, which had a majority opposed to China's entry into the Korean War, and Mao prevailed, and China entered the Korean War. But after 1957, there was no longer even very much discussion, and the Politburo was only 5 at this time, and gradually expanded, especially after Deng Xiaoping came to power and after Mao Zedong's death. And the reason it expanded was that more interest groups needed to be represented at the top because of the new absence of a supreme leader, although there was, as Deng Xiaoping came to be called, a paramount leader. Deng Xiaoping was certainly first among equals, and his power waxed and waned. However, after Deng Xiaoping's death into the modern era, then the Politburo Standing Committee no longer had an absolutely dominant leader. When Jiang Zemin took over, he was, again, first among equals, but in a much weaker position. The same was true of Hu Jintao, a declining prestige, declining power. And now there is Xi Jinping, who we'll talk about in a bit, and he may end up reversing that trend of gradually declining power from the time of Mao. So I think by this time you probably understand this. If you want to discuss it with me, I'm happy to, either in office hours or on the phone, to clarify exactly how this business works, because I know it can be confusing. And indeed, I have to say, in a lot of the courses I've taken in the past on China, the Politburo Standing Committee and the Politburo and the Central Committee over which they rule, and the National People's Congress, how all those things work, have not been clarified very well, and so I've been trying to clarify this to you step by step as we've proceeded through this course. And if I haven't, and you want to know more, please feel free to contact me either during office hours or any normal business hours during the week. You'll notice on the chart on the left that the Central Military Commission is separate from everything else, as is the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. They both report straight to the Central Committee, in theory. The Discipline Inspection Commission, indeed, is controlled directly by the Politburo, but it has a lot less independent power than it is supposed to have, and we'll get more into the reasons for that as we go in this lecture and next week. The Central Military Commission, as we'll discuss in a moment, is possibly the most de facto independent body and powerful body amongst all of them that we're discussing. Let's go on to slide 5. Now let's talk about the functional government side, and stop here for a moment and review something that you should already know from high school civics courses and perhaps from an American history or government course here. Your government, the American government, has an executive branch, it has a legislative branch, and it has a judicial branch. And these are separate, and indeed, they often have very public as well as private disputes. one cannot really dominate the other. We've never had a military coup in this country. I hope we never do. We have a very, very independent judiciary that at times overrules the Congress and at times overrules the executive. And the executive branch, of course, is the biggest branch of government. Underneath the President of the United States, you have all these different departments, the Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, Department of State, so on and so forth. Almost all the federal employees of the government work underneath the President. They ultimately report to the President. But then you have people in the judiciary, their staffers, judges and their staffers. You have members of Congress and their staffers, who are each in separate government bodies that do not report to the President, and their pay does not come through the executive branch. And as you know, the Congress controls the purse strings. So let's keep that in mind as we turn and we look at the Chinese government. So we've already discussed how the party is in ultimate control of everything. In past lectures, we've noted that in a city in China, that it's the municipal party secretary who's really in charge, is the political figure in charge of the city, similar to one of our mayors, but that the mayor of the city is more like our city manager. The political leader of the city is the party secretary, and the administrator of the city is the mayor. And underneath the mayor are all of the departments of the city government, each of which has a party committee. And it's the party committee that's really in charge. Whoever's a leader of a municipal government department will probably be a member of the party committee in charge, but is not necessarily the senior member of that party committee. And indeed, the mayor is on the municipal party committee, but is not, usually not, the chair of the party committee. There are times, as we'll see in a moment, when we look at Xi Jinping's career, who's now in charge of the party and the state in China, the ultimate leader and the head of the Politburo Standing Committee. When we look at Xi Jinping's career, we'll see that at one point he was both a governor and a provincial party secretary. He held both of those posts. But now let's look at China's actual government. So in theory, again, the National People's Congress is in charge, but in reality, that's not true. People going to the National People's Congress are told what to do. They're told whom to elect as the premier and whom to elect as the vice premiers. And then the ministers of the 21 departments of government, I'm not sure how many are on this chart, but I don't see any defunct ministries on this chart, except for Ministry of Railways. So this one probably does have a couple that have been abolished. But this is the general picture. So each of those ministers is going to be on the CCP committee for the ministry. And this is an exception to what I was just talking about. Usually, the secretary of the CCP committee for each ministry is going to be the minister. So this is the government side. This is where people go to fill out forms to get what they want. This is where things are run, such as the main parts of the chemical industry, for example. The ones that have been abolished that I know of are the Ministry of Coal, that's in the middle of that table in the middle there, Ministry of Railways. I think the Ministry of Chemical Industry has been abolished. There used to be Ministry of Information Industry, it's been changed as well. So it's mostly these industrial ministries that have been changed into state corporations, and we'll get to that a little bit more with that in a moment. And you can see them on the right, the ones that were changed over. This has been a gradual process. So let's go ahead and go on. Oh, and by the way, the party does not hold press conferences ever. You might see Xi Jinping at a press conference sometime in the future, but I bet you won't, actually. I think you'll probably only see the Premier Li Keqiang at a press conference, and the State Council is the one that will hold monthly or quarterly press conferences, like you see here in this picture. The party does not hold press conferences. And as McGregor, makes clear in this week's reading, the head of the party, when he travels overseas, whether it was Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin in the past or Xi Jinping today, they always travel not in their capacity as party leader, but in their capacity as head of state. And in the recent past, since Deng Xiaoping passed away, the party and state are headed by the same person. In the United States, it would simply not do, for political reasons, for Barack Obama to receive the head of the Chinese Communist Party, even though informed people know that that's who Xi Jinping is. He receives the president of the PRC. There are protocol reasons behind that too, that you don't want to get into until you're a graduate student. And as well, when Xi Jinping would travel someplace like North Korea, he would travel as head of party, because North Korea has a special relationship with China. That is, its primary relationship with the Chinese is party to party, Communist Party to Communist Party. Let's go on to slide 6. So now let's talk about the very important body, the kingmaker in this whole formula, the Central Military Commission. At times in the history of the PRC, the Central Military Commission has waxed and waned in its importance, but it has never been unimportant. The height of its power was probably during the Cultural Revolution, after the chaos subsided in 1969, when revolutionary committees were established all over China, as we discussed previously, to replace the devastated party structure in the localities that had been sacrificed for the sake of Mao's Cultural Revolution to the ravages of young Red Guards. So the military took over, and indeed in the three-way leadership of party and military and Red Guard elements that took over afterwards, the Red Guards eventually vanished from that three-way leadership, and the army was dominant at first, but then in about 1972, Mao decided, after Lin Biao fled China, Mao decided it was time to scale back on the military's power, and the party began to be dominant in local areas once again. So that period from about 1968 to 1972 was the height of the Central Military Commission's power, and indeed the height of the PLA's power, because they had a lot of seats on the Politburo and several on the Politburo Standing Committee. However, in more recent times, the military has had fewer and fewer Politburo seats. That's the expanded Politburo, the 27-member body that exists today, from which the Politburo Standing Committee is chosen. There are only two military figures on the Politburo, the expanded Politburo, out of the 27, as there are only 2 women, which we'll discuss in a moment too. But the Central Military Commission remains extremely powerful, both in terms of course, it's the gun that the party uses to keep control, and in terms of its political influence in choosing the ultimate leadership of the party. One cannot become a leader, a senior leader in the Chinese Communist Party today without the blessing of the military. This man here that you see in this picture, Xu Qiliang, is the head of the People's Liberation Army Air Forces, and he is now the number 2 on the Central Military Commission, Xi Jinping being the number 1. And I won't bother reading all this stuff to you, but you just look at these bullet points and you get the picture that the Air Force is becoming more important, that area denial capability, in other words, the ability to shoot missiles out in and around Taiwan, is becoming more important to keep the U.S. Navy out. Cyber warfare is becoming important. If you read the newspapers, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just web search cyber warfare in China and you'll come up with a truckload of information about what's been going on lately. And there's nothing particularly Chinese about any of this. These things are going on all over the place. You don't see that much discussion about it except in specialized journals and maybe in the New York Times. That is beyond the sort of sexy Chinese military getting into this or that government department kind of thing that you see every once in a while. But expanding into space and into the electromagnetic spaces, that is the cyber spaces, is standard military strategy nowadays amongst the bigger powers, and that more and more includes China. We can stop here for audio 1. We'll go on to slide 7.